Almost one-third of American small businesses are owned by women, and that number is on the rise, especially in fields that were once considered male-only territory.
And in the current tough economic environment, more women have been inspired to strike out on their own. Some women-owned businesses are doing very well, including one Virginia-based moving company that VOA's Julie Taboh visited. Let's take a look.
A few decades ago, this truck would likely have belonged to a company owned by a man, but it actually belongs to Barbara Ayers. She is president and CEO of Apple Transfer, based in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which helps move households and businesses all across the United States and overseas. Ayers started the company with her brother in 1988.
We started out, it was just my brother and me. We had one small truck. He actually did the moving, and I took care of the office.
Today, she oversees a fleet of trucks and a large storage facility and employs up to 100 people during peak moving season.
So, Julie, why are we seeing so many more women starting their own businesses?
Well, that's a good question. Back in the 1970s, it all started with legislation. An act was passed where women could actually sign for a loan without a male co-signer. So that kind of set the foundation. But then since then, of course, a lot more women have entered the workforce, and these women have been working mostly because they needed to, for economic reasons, but also there was a part of it that women just wanted to have more fulfillment. They were getting more educated, they were entering into fields that they've always wanted to be in, and so there was a lot more women getting into the workforce. And after a while, a lot of the women kind of hit that glass ceiling, that proverbial glass ceiling where they just felt they weren't going as far as they wanted, maybe they weren't being as creative as they wanted, and also the fact that economically they were not maybe getting as compensated for the same amount of work as men were. So there was also another issue of balancing work and family. You know, a lot of women, of course, you know, have children, and they were trying to balance the demands of raising a family with the demands of being a professional woman. And they found that maybe, especially years ago, there was not as much flexibility in the workforce for women to be able to balance the two.
When we talk about a small business, how small is small?
A lot of it depends on what kind of business you have. So the numbers do change, but for the purposes of what we're talking about, 500 employees or less does define you as a small business. And to be women-owned, you have to be 51% owner. So for purposes of, say, the Barbers of the world who have a moving company, or let's say someone has a small construction company, as long as you're under 500 employee, have less than 500 employees, that defines you as a small business.
And so what's interesting is that we've seen women in these traditional businesses that people would think women would be involved in, but then we've also seen them entering into businesses and areas, industries that are traditionally male-dominated.
Exactly. I mean, we normally think about women business owners as having a little flower shop down the road or a little cookie business. But yes, more and more women are entering into fields that were normally dominated by men, and that includes everything from construction, IT, and more green technology.
And it really does defy expectations, though, this woman, as you mentioned, who's so elegant, and yet she owns a bunch of trucks.
Exactly. And more women. And she has like-minded colleagues and friends who are entering into these fields. So yes, more and more women getting into these male-dominated areas and just loving it and feeling like there really are no barriers. If you were to ask me what areas, you know, are not open to them, and I'm sure it could be argued that there are some that, you know, maybe just the physical strength or the nature of certain types of businesses, but for the most part, it isn't so much a question of, you know, why, it's why not.
Anna Harvey of the U.S. Small Business Administration says women-owned businesses in the U.S. are flourishing.
If you think about 1979, only 5% of the privately owned businesses in this country were owned by women. So we are now here in 2000, almost 13, and 30% of the privately owned businesses are owned by women.
Now, talking about the idea that there are no barriers, you still have, women have come a long way in this country. You have a lot more gender equality in the workplace, but there are still some difficulties that exist, some challenges. You have women earning 77 cents to the dollar that every man earns for the same work. So what are some of the challenges that women who own businesses, who own workplaces face?
Well, when I talked to Barbara about this, she said that one of the main problems was people associated, for example, a moving company with men. And so when she was trying to conduct her business and expand her business, she did come across a sort of old way of thinking among these older men who in the beginning were a little bit reluctant to maybe, want to do business with her or
skeptical
to be supportive. Yeah. But she says, honestly, if you have a good product and you do a good job and you have good word of mouth, over time people just start to accept you based on your track record, and people not thinking twice about a woman answering the phone and saying, I'm the CEO of this construction company or this cement factory.
And of course, we'd like to thank Julie Taboh, who covers women's stories and more here at VOA.